right. All right, guys. Well, let's turn to Psalms chapter 10. So we're going to be in Psalms chapter 10. And I'm hopeful that we can do Psalms 10, Psalms 11, and Psalms 12 tonight. So we'll just see how talkative y'all are to see how far we get with it. So in Psalm chapter 10, he starts out in verse 1. He says, "Why do you stand afar off, O Lord? Why do you hide in times of trouble? The wicked in his pride persecutes the poor. Let them be caught in the plots which they have devised. For the wicked boasts of his heart's desire. He blesses the greedy and renounces the Lord. The wicked in his proud countenance does not seek God. None is in his thoughts. God is in none of his thoughts. His ways are always prospering. Your judgments are far above, out of his sight. As for all his enemies, he sneers at them. He has said in his heart, I shall not be moved. I shall never be in adversity. His mouth is full of cursing and deceit and oppression. Under his tongue is trouble and iniquity. He sits in the lurking places of the villages. In the secret places he murders the innocent. His eyes are secretly fixed on the helpless. He lies in wait secretly as a lion in his den. He lies in wait to catch the poor. He catches the poor when he draws them into his net. So he crouches, he lies low, that the helpless man may fall by his strength. He has said in his heart, God has forgotten. He hides his face, he will never see. Arise, O Lord. O God, lift your hand. Do not forget the humble. Why do the wicked renounce God? He has said in his heart, you will not require an account. But you have seen, for you observe trouble and grief. You repay it by your hand. The helpless commits himself to you, and you are the helper of the fatherless. Break the arm of the wicked and the evil man. Seek out his wickedness until you find none. The Lord is king forever and ever. The nations have perished out of his land. Lord, you have heard the desire of the humble. You will prepare their heart. You will cause your ear to hear, to do justice to the fatherless and to the oppressed, that the man of the earth may oppress no more." All right, so Psalms 10 is one of the larger ones that we've looked at so far. And something that we have to observe is, here, this psalm, 2/3 of it, they are talking about evil. They're talking about the wicked person. Now, what is the book of Psalms? The book of Psalms is a song book. This is basically their hymnal of the day. Could you imagine one of our hymns that 2/3 of the hymn is just talking about how bad the bad people are? We don't have many of those, right? I mean, we have, victory in Jesus, or, the old rugged cross and things, like most of our songs are God-focused, but here what we're going to see is a repetitive theme throughout the book of Psalms, to where their songs are going to deal a lot with the reality of evil and the consequences of evil, the attributes of evil, and then the consequences of evil. So they had a much healthier understanding of evil in the world than probably modern Christianity does. So he starts out, and this first 2/3 is really just a profile of the evil person. And he gives us three things, let's say four. He gives us four things that are kind of a bullet points of what the evil man is. First, in verse 4, he says, God's in none of his thoughts. He doesn't think about God. He doesn't consider God in any decision that he makes, any action that he takes, any words that he says, anywhere that he goes, any activity he endeavors in. God enters into none of his thoughts. His thoughts are dictated by what he thinks, what he feels, what he wants, and what's best for him. That's all he thinks about is himself. There's no God focus to the evil man whatsoever. Then in verse 6, it says that the evil man in his heart has said, I shall not be moved. I shall never be in adversity. In other words, he said, hey, can't nobody take me. Can't nobody get the best of me. I'm always going to come out on top. I'm the biggest, baddest, roughest, toughest thing around, and no harm will ever come to me. I'm going to get the best out of every situation. I'm going to come out on top no matter what. He said that's an idea that the evil man thinks. So he's not worried about the consequences of his actions because he thinks, well, who dare would stand up against me? Who dare would come against me kind of attitude here. Then it says in verse 11 that another thing that the evil man thinks is that God has forgotten. Like, even if he acknowledges that there is a God, which he has to say that God is forgotten, right? He can't believe there's not a God. It says that he don't think about God. He may know about God, he just don't consider God. Because here in his thoughts, he says, God has forgotten. So he recognizes that there is a God, he just doesn't obey him as God. So he follows what he thinks, what he feels. He says, I'll get away with it. Maybe God created everything and God set everything in motion, and then God went and took a nap. He just kind of left us alone. And he may revisit at some time. He may intervene at some moments if we want him to. But by and large, God's just not interested. He said that's an evil man's thought. That's at the very basis, at the very heart of how an evil man thinks. Is like God's not paying attention. He can get by with this one. Now, when we contrast that with what we see of an evil woman in Proverbs chapter, I believe it's 4 or 6. I believe it's 6. Here, the evil woman, she goes to catch the man, and one of the things that she says is, my husband's gone, and he's going to be gone for a long time, and I've paid my dues, and I made my sacrifices, like all good is between me and God. Why don't you come on over later? It's this same idea of if I can get away with it, then it's okay. As long as my hand doesn't get slapped right now, then it must be okay. So it's not a looking of what are the consequences, what's the long term, what really is going on. There is a final judgment. Really, what evil needs is just to think that they can get away with it right now. And if they can get away with it right now, then they think, well, God's not paying attention. He's not going to remember this. God's forgotten. Then the fourth thing that we see is actually in verse 13. Where he says, you will not require an account. So the evil man thinks that there's no judgment, that there may be a benevolent God, there may be a creator God, but there's no judgment coming. Well, if there's no judgment, then who cares how you behave? Who cares the consequences of your decisions? Who cares what you do to other people or how you treat other people or what you spend your life on? Who cares if there's no judgment? Now, when Peter starts talking about the last days, one of the things that he says will happen in the last days is that man will no longer want to talk about creation. They'll want to say there is no God, this just happened. They won't want to talk about the flood, which is consequences. And then the last thing, they won't want to talk about the second coming. They don't want to talk about judgment. Because all three of those, if they can take out a creator, then that means that they can do whatever they want to. They don't owe anything to anybody. They don't have a source anywhere. And then if they can take out the flood, then that's the first sign of God's judgment. They can pervert the rainbow and change that into something else, give it a different meaning, a different flavor. Then they can dissuade, they can deflect away from that. And then if they can say, you know what, it's been 2,000 years since Jesus came the first time. He's not coming back. Well, then they think that they've gotten away with it. And if you think you can get away with it, you're a lot more likely to do it, right? I mean, if there was 100% certainty that on your way home tonight, that if you sped, that you were going to get a speeding ticket, would you speed? No. Now, why do you speed? Because you think you can get away with it. They can't put a cop on every corner. They can't have a cop at every stop sign. They can't. So I might can get away with it. And so there we're tempted to drive a little bit too fast or maybe roll through a stop sign or all these various things or, because why? Because we think we might can get away with it. But if there was a certainty of an accounting, well then we would go, well, there's no way. Let me set my cruise control a few miles under the speed limit. Let me hit the brakes whenever I start to go down a hill just so that I don't accidentally transgress across there and accidentally go faster than I was intending to. And so here, the evil guy, he thinks, well, maybe there's no accounting. Maybe my actions will never have to be paid for. Maybe there will be no consequences. So it gives us these 4 heart thoughts, or these 4 attitudes of evil. And then it gives us some actions of the evil. The first thing that it starts to talk about is in verse 7, it talks about his mouth. It says that for the evil man, his mouth is full of cursing and deceit and oppression. Now, what does cursing mean? All right. Okay. How about this? In America, we have things that we call curse words. Now, what are they? Fasting and tithing, right? Those are the 2. All right, but once we get past those 2, like we understand. Now, don't yell them out, okay? I'm not looking for multiple choice here, okay? But what are curse words? They are words that we use to convey emotion when our intellect isn't sharp enough. So they're emotion words, is what they are. And we've determined certain words that are curse words or cuss words. Now, if I take those same basket of words and I go to another English-speaking country, let's say Belize or Canada or England or some of these, if I go to some of these other countries, do you think that they're going to have the exact same basket of cuss words? No, I mean, they may have some that they put in and some they take out. So I mean, even around America, we have a common agreement of certain ones that we say, hey, these, we don't need to be saying these are just ugly. But then even culturally or regionally, there's probably some northern words that we don't, that they would have as cuss words or put downs that we just simply don't have. And in fact, here recently I was talking to a good friend of mine that's a pastor in upstate New York. And he told me, I said, what was the culture change whenever you went from South Alabama to northern New York? What was one of the cultural differences that you had to get used to? And he said, oh, that's easy. The deacons' meetings are at the bar. I said, what? He said, yeah, we meet at a bar for the deacons' meetings. And he said, there's a private room in the back, and that's where we have our deacons' meetings, is in the private room of the bar. I said, yeah, that would be strange. He said, you want to know what's funny? He says, the Methodist pastor owns the bar. And I said, yeah, we wouldn't have that at all. I said, here, the deacons just don't make eye contact in the liquor store. That's, it's totally different down here. And so, but up there's a whole different culture than what there is here. If we go out west, there's going to be a different culture. It's a big country. And so certain things are going to be thought inappropriate or cuss words or certain phrases that we just don't understand because they're not part of our culture. So when he's talking about cursings here, do you think he's talking about certain words that are just off limits? No. He's not talking about that. Now, there's unwholesome talk, and there's certain words that are probably just not beneficial for us to say. They're not going to propagate the conversation. They're not going to give the certain kind of influence that we want to it. So those words should be used extremely sparingly, if at all, in the Christian life. But this cursing that he's talking about is much more of a negative connotation, a condescension, a harsh, hateful, destroying kind of talk. Okay? So it's much more with the intention than the actual language. All right? Because like with those cuss words, like sometimes people say them and they happy cuss words and they say it happily. And then sometimes they say it mean, and sometimes they say it hard and ugly, and it's meant to be vulgar in its very sense. And that's just how it is. In fact, geez, did you know that the Bible contains cuss words? Yeah, it does. Balaam wrote a cuss word. And when Jesus comes back, he sends everybody to a cuss word that don't believe in him. That's right. Heck. That's right. He dangs everyone to heck who doesn't believe in gosh. All right. And so That's it's those words there, that if we just simply isolate those and we say, oh, well, that's what it means, then we really lose the deeper, richer, bigger value of what he's talking about here with cursing, that the evil man curses with his mouth. When he has something to say, whatever he has to say tears down. Whatever he has to say belittles. Whatever he has to say is cruel. Whatever he has to say is just mean-hearted and mean-spirited at the very core nature of it. It's not fruitful speech. It's not upbuilding speech. It's not uplifting speech. It is always negative, always harsh, always belittling. That's what he does. His mouth is full of it. To get what we want. We only give the information that's necessary to get what we want. We kind of cloak things or shade things or exclude things, and there we're deceiving. We're trying to make people think something that is not true. And then it says not only is his mouth full of cursing, not only is it full of deceit, but it's also full of oppression, taking advantage of other people, holding other people down, keeping them in their place, not allowing people to be fruitful and to prosper and to move up. It says, under his tongue is trouble and iniquity. It's trouble and iniquity. It's just always problems. Wherever he goes, whatever he touches, whatever he says, always a problem, always a mess, always something to clean up after he leaves. And so he says that's part of what this evil guy is. The reason why he is that way is because there's no consequences. It's kind of like why people are so ugly on the internet. Yeah, and they get real brave on Twitter and stuff, and they'll say ugly, harsh, awful things. Like somebody does something, or like let's say, some kid on Saturday afternoon is playing, he's wearing one of those helmets, and people are cheering for him, and he goes to kick a field goal, and he misses it. And then you got a bunch of people who go on the internet and they start tweeting at them or Facebooking them, and they how'd you miss that? I'm going to kill you and all this kind of stuff. And they're being real ugly and mean to them. You know why they're doing that? It's because you can't get punched in the face through the internet. All right. And it's easy to hide behind the screen. It's easy to hide behind the keyboard and be real brave because there's no consequences to it. And so people will be very ugly and very mean-spirited through that. And it's because they don't feel like there's any consequences to what they're doing. Now, if whatever you tweeted or you said or whatever, if it was published with your telephone number and your address, you probably wouldn't be so bold, right? And most of the people doing that, like they have like an Anon account, to where it's like not their name and not their picture, but it's like a fake name and a fake picture and all that. And they're real brave because nobody knows their real name. And so that's part of how they think they're going to get away with it. And so with that, they can act however they want to, because what are the consequences to their actions? So he goes on down and he says that here's the behavior of the evil man. He sits in the lurking places of the villages. In the secret places, he murders the innocent. Does he do it in public? Does he do it out where everybody can see? Nah, evil loves to breed and grow in darkness, in the shade, in the corners, in the shadows. That's where it really likes to take place. The whisper, the quiet meeting, just the two of us. That's where it really likes to flame up. It doesn't do it in public. It says his eyes are secretly fixed on the helpless. He lies in wait secretly, and a lion in his den. He lies in wait to catch the poor. He catches the poor when he draws them into his net, so he crouches and he lies low. He's real sneaky. He's sneaky. People may not even realize what he is until it's too late. Because after all, it'd be a really bad trap if he was like, hey, I'm over here with a net, look at me. You come through here, anybody want to get in the net? Like, you're not going to catch many people. And so what he is, he's real sneaky. Looks innocent, looks calm, looks just as gentle as a dove. But in reality, man, he's just waiting to throw that net. He's waiting to hurt. He's waiting to take advantage. That's what he does. And it's not out in public, because out in public, if somebody really saw what was going on, what would they do? They'd go, hey, watch out for that guy. that weirdo with the net. Stay away from him. That's why he has to stay in the shadows. And so, that's his profile off of it. But then in verse 12, we see a turn in the psalm. And in verse 12, there's this call to action to where after the psalmist has written about the evil and the evil thoughts and the evil intentions and the evil actions and the evil outcomes, then he comes to verse 12 and he says, "Arise, O Lord. O God, lift your hand. Do not forget the humble. Why do the wicked renounce God? He said in his heart, you will require no account. But you, O Lord, have seen, and you observe the trouble and grief. You repay it by your hand. The helpless commits himself to you. You are the helper of the fatherless. Break the arm of the wicked and the evil man. Seek out his wickedness until you find none." All right. So, these actions against the wicked man, is the psalmist, is he taking the fight into his own hands? And saying, I will defeat, I will hurt, I will champion. No, like his call is to the Lord, right? Right? So his appeal and his plea is, Lord, you make it right. Lord, you rise up. Lord, you take it over. Lord, you fight the battle. Lord, you. All right. But does the Lord always fight the battle by himself? Oh, y'all mean he didn't just strike Goliath down with lightning? You mean he didn't have, he didn't just set the prophets of Baal on fire on top of the mountain? So God sometimes uses us to do that, doesn't he? All right. So here what his appeal is, Lord, you do it. And in response, sometimes God says, okay, I'll do it through you. I'm going to use you to do it. All right. So our appeal isn't, God, I'm going to do this. Lord, get on my side. But rather our appeal is, Lord, you do it. And if you require me to be a part of this, okay, I'll do what you say. But Lord, you do this. You do this mighty work, and you let me be on your side. Versus, I'm going to do it, Lord, you get on my side. See, sometimes we get so headstrong and we get so passionate and we get so on it about this is what's right, this is what we got to do, this is that, man, we can get ahead of God, and all of a sudden we start operating in our own strength, our own wisdom, our own thoughts, and a lot of times we get our own results and our own consequences. Versus saying, you know what, Lord, you just do what's right, and I'm just going to play my part, my bit role. If you want me to say something, you tell me what to say. You want me to do something, you tell me what to do. I'm going to stand. I'm not going to whimper. I'm not going to cower. But at the same time, I'm not going to fight until you're ready to fight, Lord. You just tell me when. I'm going to put on my armor, and having done all to stand, I'm going to stand therefore. I'm going to wait for the charge. I'm going to wait for the Lord to say when. And so, his appeal is heavenward, and then at the very end, here's the comfort of the Christian. He says, the Lord is king forever and ever. I mean, evil dude may get away with it for a while, but who's the king? The king is the Lord, and he's the king forever and ever. The nations have perished out of his land. Lord, you have heard the desire of the humble. You will prepare their heart. You will cause your ear to hear, to do justice to the fatherless and the oppressed, that the man of the earth may oppress no more. So it's all God's. It's in God's hands. And the end is coming, and the reckoning will occur. The judgment will happen. And when it does, on the other side, everything's great. So we're going to look for that. All right, any questions on chapter 10? All right, let's move on into 11 then. Now, 11 is a little bit different. It's still going to talk about the wicked guy, but it is a lot more kind of positive, I suppose, where, number 10 kind of gets a little depressing in the middle. He says, in the Lord I will put my trust. How can you say to my soul, flee as a bird to the mountain? For look, the wicked has bent their bow. They make ready their arrow on the string, that they may shoot secretly at the upright in heart. If the foundations are destroyed, what can the righteous do? And then he tells us, the Lord is in his holy temple. The Lord's throne is in heaven. His eyes behold, his eyelids test the sons of man. The Lord tests the righteous, but the wicked and the one who loves violence, his soul hates. Upon the wicked he will rain coals, fire and brimstone, and burning wind shall be their portion of their cup. For the Lord is righteous, he loves righteousness. His countenance beholds the upright. All right, so here the psalmist writes, and here it's very much more, hey, this time of trouble, this time of heartache, all this is happening, but then there's the conclusion of how great and how glorious God is and what the end result will be. So he starts out, and again, he's talking about things are desperate, things are hard, but I'm going to put my trust in the Lord, and who can say to my soul, flee as a bird to your mountain. And then it talks about that the wicked bend their bow, and they make ready their arrow on the string, that they may shoot secretly at the upright in heart. Do you see that again? That idea of this like secret thing that's going on, this evil trying to triumph under a cloak of darkness, in the shadows kind of thing. Here, the wicked, they're trying to shoot the upright in heart, but they're trying to shoot them secretly. Real quiet. Trying to get everything in place behind the scenes before it all comes to light. And he says that also that the wicked, that they view the righteous like a game bird, just somebody they can take advantage of, just something that they can kill, that they can injure. That they look at the righteous and they see supper. They don't see another person. They actually see them as an object, not as a person. And he says, they shoot secretly at the upright in heart. If the foundations are destroyed, what can the righteous do? Now, what are the foundations? Because that's kind of a line that's just kind of sticking out there. What is the foundations? What would the foundations be to the psalmist who's writing this in the Old Testament? What did you say, Derek? The law, exactly. The commandments, the law, exactly. And that's what it would be. So it's, here he's saying, if the foundations are destroyed, if what our society is built off of, if the very founding core of who we are, if that gets destroyed, what do we do? What do we do? If everything falls apart, what do we do? That's scary, right? I mean, just think about the founding of America. Like, these people get off of a boat because their home country wants to take everything that they have away from them and throw them in prison because they don't want to go to the government church. And so they get on boats and cross an ocean to go nowhere. To get off on a shore that there's no city, there's no house, there's no supermarket, there's no crops planted, there's no nothing. There's no map. That's bold, right? That's bold. If I was like, all right, guys, listen, we're tired of this, we're getting out of here. And you go, where are we going? Yonder. When are we going to get there? Later. You go, what are we going to do? Build society. And you're like, with what? I don't know. But what food's over there? Don't know. Well, is there clean water? I don't know that either. You say, what's the climate like? It's hot sometimes, it's cold sometimes. And be like, yeah, let's go. Not a lot of signups for that, right? Like we've got a vacation plan for the end of October. And in that, Lindsay's already picking out where we're going to eat. She was like, I've joined a Facebook group for Panama City, and I asked, what are the best restaurants? And this one had 17 recommendations, and this one had 12, and this one had 4. And that's a long time away. That's crazy, but that's how we want to live. That's a certainty that we want. Now imagine none of that being there. Imagine back in the day where if you wanted to drive, you had to pack a lunch because there wasn't restaurants on the way. And if you wanted something to drink, you better take it with you. Yeah, like you had to load up the cooler because there's no like gas stations and hamburger joints and stuff like that. That's crazy for us, right? I mean, the other night, me and Lindsay, we took a road trip, and on our way back, we literally got off on 4 consecutive exits. You know why? Because she drank water at dinner. Yeah, I mean, like, that's just how it, imagine, there's none of that. Like, there's none of that out there for them. And these guys are like, no, we're going to build a civilization. We're going to build a society. I don't know if our generation has what it takes to rebuild a society. I just don't know if we do. So the idea of foundations being destroyed is really, really scary. Because most people in the United States haven't even read the Constitution. How are you going to rebuild that thing? How are you going to rewrite it? You ain't ever even read it. Most Christians today haven't even read the Bible. How are you going to tell people what it says? How are you going to train up your children in the way that they're to go? You don't even know what it says. You haven't even read it. Been toting that thing to church for 50 years. Ain't never read it. So if the foundations go away, if we don't continually build upon the foundations, if the foundation was to go away, how do you rebuild the foundation? That's really scary. That's a scary proposition to live with. Now, here with this statement, that seems just off the wall to throw in the middle of it. If the foundations are destroyed, what can the righteous do? You want to know what we can do? The Lord's in his holy temple. The Lord's throne is in heaven. His eyes behold, his eyelids test the sons of man. The Lord tests the righteousness, but the wicked and the one who loves violence, his soul hates. All those dudes got on that boat. You know how they made it? The Lord was with them. And God did a lot of that. I mean, it took sweat, it took effort. Half of them died within the first year that they were here. Like, it was hard. But the Lord did that. Those guys that wrote the Constitution, like, I know not all of them were Christians, but they were definitely all absolutely influenced by Christian society. They were a product of Christian society. I think the Lord had a hand in a lot of that. So in that, how would we rebuild? The same way we built it the first time, just by obeying God, by doing what God says. It's just that simple. So we can become very fearful and fretful over what we might lose, but we have to maintain what we have and take confidence in what we have, is that we have the Lord. And the Lord's still in his holy temple. No matter what happens, the Lord's still the Lord. The Lord's in his holy temple. He's on his throne in heaven, and his eyes are upon all that's happening. He says that he tests the righteous, but the wicked and the one who loves violence, his soul hates. Ooh. Now, we just learned some stuff, okay? Number one, does God have a soul? The psalmist said he did. All right. Number two, does God hate stuff? Now, hold on, y'all. I learned in Sunday school, God is love. Now, if God is love, God can't hate nobody, can he? Oh, okay. But now I'm supposed to hate the sin but love the sinner. So God hates sin, but God loves everybody, right? Now, wait a second. He said, the wicked and the one who loves violence, his soul hates. So God hates people who love violence, and God hates people who are wicked. And we don't like those people either, do we? People who are just always violent. You don't know whether you're going to get a hug or a punch. We don't like those guys. All right? And so here he's saying that God hates at a very soul level, wicked and people who hate violence. What does it mean, people who love violence? What does it mean to love violence? Always causing trouble, always in the middle of something, always stirring something, always trying to hurt somebody. And they love when people get hurt. Oh boy, they can't get enough of it. Now it may be, physical violence and stuff like that, where they just love to see people get beat up, or, these real messy, nasty horror movies where there's blood and gore and all that kind of stuff. And they really have an affinity for that, or like the MMA, and, they come out all busted and bruised up and eyes all, messed up and stuff, and people champion that and love that stuff. It might be that, but I think on a base level, what it really is they just like to see people hurt. And like they just get joy out of other people's pain and suffering. And so at some level in every situation, if they can see somebody hurting, somebody suffering, somebody going through a tough time, like they just kind of feel good about themselves. Maybe not even necessarily that they have caused it, but they're just enjoying that the other person's going through it. And so he says that those people, God hates that kind of person, because God, they're all about tearing down. They love destruction. And our God is a creator God. He's a build up. He's a make it better kind of God. And so they're very contrary to his very nature. And then wickedness is the opposite of righteousness. So whatever God says, this person says the opposite. Whatever God wants, they want the opposite of that. And so if God says this is marriage, they go, well, the opposite is marriage. If God says this is what love is, they have the opposite of love. If God says this is what is right, this is how we raise our children, they go, well, we do something opposite of that. This is how we conduct ourselves in business. No, we're not going to do that. Throw that out. This is how we're married. Nope, we're going to throw out God's design and purpose in marriage, and we're just going to go a separate route. That here, those are the wicked, and it says that God hates that. Now, why would God hate the wicked? Well, because everything that God told us to do was a blessing. Every commandment he ever gave us was for our good. Everything he ever called us in was because it brings a curse and it brings destruction. And so God loves righteousness because of the fruitfulness of righteousness. This is the way he designed it to be. This is the way life works. This is what is best. And everything that's contrary or even just slightly perverted off of what he said is less than perfect. Now, it's one of those things like you can think a steak from Waffle House is really good until you get a hold of a good steak. And once you get a good steak, you don't want to eat a Waffle House steak anymore, right? And you're like, well, it's this thin and it's cooked overly well done. Look like they ran over it in the parking lot a few times. And then you get a hold of a really good, juicy, medium to maybe medium rare, but no more than that or you're weird, kind of steak. And man, it's just seasoned well and it's cooked slow and it's just tender and it's got great flavor. And then they're like, hey, you want to just put that in a to-go bag and let's go down to Waffle House and get a steak? You go, no. No. See, once you've tasted of the goodness of God, your appetite for everything else goes away. And once you've seen the perfection and the wonderfulness of God, you don't have a desire for any of the rest of that. And so one moment you can be the prodigal son eating the pea pods and thinking that that's something good. And the next moment be transformed and you see the goodness of the Father, and no longer those pea pods are they appealing, but rather you see them for what they are, for the grotesqueness of what it is. And you no longer go, you know what, I think I want to go to my Father's house and eat some pea pods with the pigs. Because now we have a total different appetite and a total different flavor because of we know the goodness of God. And in the same way, God knows his righteousness and he knows his perfect way, and he has no tolerance for anything other than the perfect way. He says, upon the wicked he'll rain coals and fire and brimstone and burning wind, and that'll be their portion and that'll be their cup. And it says, for the Lord is righteous, and he loves righteousness. He knows what's right. He knows what's good, and he loves that. And in fact, he loves it because it is him, because he's the determiner of good and bad. Righteous is righteous because he said it was righteous. So it is what is right because it's what he likes. It's what he prefers. It's what he thinks. It's his opinion. And that alone makes it right. He doesn't need agreement. He doesn't need to take a vote. There's no committee on rightness. He said it, and that's what makes it right, is the fact that he said that it's right. Okay? It's like, what's the best color? It's purple. You know why? Because I like purple and I have the microphone. So purple's the best color. All right? And what's the best dessert? Well, it's ice cream, of course. Everybody loves ice cream, right? And you go, but I think no, hey, if I'm going to make my world and I'm going to create it, then guess what? I get to determine what's right inside my world and inside my creation. It don't matter what you think. What matters is what the Creator has said, what he set it up to be. So, the kids were doing their homeschool work, and there was this one, it was a math problem. And they come to me, and they said, I forget even what it was. It was like 3 plus 4, which equals what? Some of y'all weren't real confident. There wasn't a lot of gusto. Some of y'all were waiting for your neighbor to say it, and you're like, it's 7. Yes, 7. It was 7. Okay. And so, but 3 plus 4 was 7, and they brought it to me, and they were like, hey, what is this? And I was like, well, you know this. You got 4 and you got 3 over here, so now let's count them. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. You got 7. And they said, yeah, but that's wrong. I said, no, that's right. I did Kumon math. We were way before Common Core. I can do math like crazy, real fast, all right? And so I said, no, it's 7. And they said, well, no, it's not, because look, I put 7 in, I hit enter, and it says red X. That's wrong. And I said, no, it's right. They said, but no, it's wrong. Now, guess what? It was wrong. You know why it was wrong? Because whoever programmed that program, they determined what was right and what was wrong. And the answer should have been 7, but you know what it actually was? 8. Yeah, I know, and they got a job for the government, Jamie. Who would have thought that? And so in that, here inside this program, what was right was determined by the programmer. It didn't matter that I thought contrary. The programmer said that 3 plus 4 equals 8, and you didn't get to move on until 3 plus 4 equals 8. You put 7 in there all day. You had to watch all the help videos, everything. You come back, guess what? It's still 8. You know why? Programmer said it was 8. In the same way, God has designed his creation. He has made his world. He has populated it. He's made his whole world to function on frequency and math. Everything in the world has a frequency and has a math equation attached to it. And so in that, when he determined something to be right, guess what? It's right. Because he did it. Because he said it. Because he programmed it to be right. You can try to do it a different way, all that you want to, but guess what? It don't matter what you think you know. What matters is what God has said is right. And that's what's righteous. Everything else is wicked. All right. Any questions on chapter 11? All right. Well, then we'll bring it to a close. Y'all talk too much. I didn't get to go to chapter 12. And so, all right, if no questions, then we'll dismiss in prayer. Brother Chris, will you dismiss us?